Hi, I'm joined today by Lou and by Matt, and we're going to talk about tax transparency. So, to kick off, what actually is tax transparency and what's it got to do with ESG? So, Matt, over to you first.
Yeah, so the way I look at tax transparency very simply is it is about sharing more of your tax information publicly, something we haven't done that much of in the past. It's very, very relevant for ESG, I think, for all parts of it. If you think about the amount of environmental taxes we have now, directly relating to environment, social, your contribution to the markets, the societies in which you operate, and from a governance perspective, of course, we all want to see all of our big businesses having really strong governance in all areas, including tax.
And you, Lou?
I'd agree with all of that. I always start with the social aspects of ESG, because tax is fundamentally about your financial contribution to the societies that you operate in, being open about that contribution and open about the behaviours that go along with it. I think it's sort of very core to what the S of ESG is about.
And so I guess building on that, when you're looking at tax transparency statements, disclosures, what really is key for that meaningful disclosure?
I think clarity and narrative. Tax transparency disclosures are read by a range of stakeholders and not just tax professionals. So I think it's important to sort of articulate the context for the numbers that you disclose and sort of just help people understand a bit more what that means in the context of your business.
And Matt?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. For me, it's all around that context, making sure you're setting the scene, what you're trying to explain and why, and what should the reader expect to take from this disclosure and what should they not expect to take from this disclosure. I think numbers in isolation, always a bit of a dangerous game. We've seen that with country by country, a bit of a blunt instrument, that's probably more confusing than it is clarifying. So I think context becomes really, really important.
And what challenges may you face as an organisation in giving that meaningful disclosure with context?
I think for me, two levels of challenges in the conversations I've had with our clients. One around the change in mindset. So intellectually, we haven't done this before, we haven't disclosed this level of tax information. So there's a whole piece there of aligning stakeholders as to why we're doing that, why is that the right thing to do, and agreeing on how far you want to go in your disclosures. And then I think the second point is a practical one, which is about data. Getting the data, getting the tax information from around the world can be really challenging. Most heads of tax don't have full remit over all taxes, so getting something that you're comfortable is accurate enough to disclose can be a challenge.
It's crystal ball time. So, crystal ball's out, tax transparency world is moving really quickly. Where do you think we may be in 5 years' time? Lou first.
I think in 5 years' time, we will probably have some form of mandatory standard for disclosure. I think there's an increasing number of mandatory measures and there's increasing sort of alignment between the voluntary frameworks. So I think in 5 years' time we will probably have some form of mandatory disclosure around tax.
Do you agree, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, 5 years, I think that's probably about right. If you look at the country by country piece, which was a high level risk assessment tool and is already now a publicised document or going to be in the EU, it doesn't take long for these things to change. And I do think there's a lot of voluntary regimes out there at the moment, the GRIs, etc. It doesn't take much to align them and make them part of financial statement disclosure, which I think is not out of the realms of possibility.
I would agree. Final question for you both. So tax leaders, super busy, loads to do increasingly. So ESG, massive topic, as is tax transparency. What should they have on the top of their to-do list? Lou first.
I would start with finding out what the wider organisation's doing on ESG, sort of what the broader strategy and approach of the organisation is, particularly around the social aspects of ESG, because ultimately your tax disclosures and your tax strategy are going to need to be aligned to that, so that there's a coherent message across the organisation.
And Matt?
Yeah, I agree. I think that word that keeps coming up, doesn't it? Alignment is that first priority. Aligning with the broader strategy around ESG, aligning your stakeholders with the approach you want to take on tax. So what do we want to disclose and how? And then I think having a plan for getting there. So what's that qualitative approach? What are we going to say about tax? How are we going to set that context? And then on the quantitative piece, what level of information are we going to provide? Tax by type, tax by region, etc., and that plan to get the data.
Cool. Thank you both for joining and sharing your insights and perspectives. Tax transparency, things really resonated that you've spoken about around the alignment and having a plan to get there. Love it. Thank you both.